أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. الله أعلم حيث يجعل رسالته. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, please recite a second loud salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Let me start tonight, inshallah, by offering our condolences on the shahada of Imam Al-Hadi, our beloved 12th Imam, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh. We know that these days and nights that we are going through, the 26th of Jamad al-Thani, is one of the dates that has been proposed as the night of the shahada, or the day of the shahada of our beloved 10th Imam. And tonight, inshallah, we'll be taking a look at the biography of Imam Al-Hadi, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh. We know that Imam Al-Hadi is the 10th Imam within the Shia school of thought, and his time presents its own challenges. His time presents its own difficulties. If you look at the trajectory that the lives of our Imams have taken, you find that from the time of Imam al-Jawad onwards, things start to change for the Ahlul Bayt. When you look at the previous Imams, you find a lot mentioned about them in history. There are different elements, different aspects of their life that historians will report on, they will tell you about. But when it comes to the life of Imam al-Jawad, Imam al-Hadi, Imam Hassan al-Askari, then you start to see how things start to change. And the main reason for this is because these imams of ours, they were censored and they were under severe surveillance, something that you may not find with some of our other imams, for example. These imams, these final imams that I mentioned, their presence in the public sphere was a lot less compared to Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, Imam Hassan, even Imam Al-Hussein, who was martyred in the way that he was martyred. He did have a public presence. People knew who he was. He was accessible. People would go to him. People would have conversations with him. But what you find with Imam al-Jawad onwards is that things start to change. And even from the time of Imam al-Rida, you find things are starting to change for the Ahlul Bayt, because there is a practice that the Khulafa of that time are starting to adopt at that point. And this practice is not only to pressure the Imam of the time, which is what we find with all of the Ahlul Bayt, but in fact to move the Imam and to summon the Imam from the city where they live in to the city where the capital of the Khilafah belongs. You find this, for example, with Imam al-Rida, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. as in Ma'mun summoned Imam al-Rida and forced him to join him in Marw in Khurasan. You find this with Imam al-Jawad being summoned by Mu'tasim to come to Baghdad. You also find this in the case of Imam al-Hadi being summoned by Muttawakir, which we will talk about more, summoned towards the city of Samarra. And this is an extra level of surveillance. It is an extra level of pressure. It gives you an idea of how much censorship was going on around the characters of the Ahlul Bayt and how much they were under pressure. And tonight, inshallah, we want to delve a little bit deeper into the biography and the life of Imam al-Hadi. And I like to do so by posing the following questions. Number one, how did the Prophet foretell the birth of Imam al-Hadi? How did he describe this grandchild of his when he was going to be born? And when did Imam al-Hadi start to play the role of being an imam? At what age did this begin? Number two, how did Mu'tasim, the Abbasid Khalifa, plot and plan to try to influence Imam al-Hadi by choosing a mentor and a teacher for him? And in fact, how did Imam al-Hadi end up influencing his mentor and his teacher more than the teacher influencing him? Number three, how did the akhlaq of Imam al-Hadi throughout the different stages of his life take individuals who were supposed to be enemies of the Ahlul Bayt? They were supposed to be foes, adversaries of the Ahlul Bayt. How did his akhlaq, his maturity, and his intelligence turn these enemies into allies and friends? And what can we learn from this? Number four, who was the first person who took the step to destroy the grave of Imam Al-Hussein and to start to set this foundation and this wrong sunnah that many others would follow and also commit such a sin in the future? Number five, what does Imam al-Hadi teach us about the efforts and the energy that a believer is supposed to put into his work for the betterment of his own life and the lives of those around him? And number six, how charitable was Imam al-Hadi with all of the pressure that he was under? And how did Imam al-Hadi teach us to give even when we don't have any wealth to give? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 6 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjil farajahum. Let us begin from here. We know Imam al-Hadi is the 10th Imam within the Shi'i school of thought, and he has been given different names. He is the son of Imam al-Jawad. His name is Ali, but his alqab, you will find different alqab that are given to him, and of course he has his own special kunya as well. As it relates to the alqab that we are more familiar with is the laqab of Hadi and An-Naqi. Many times you will hear that will refer to the 10th Imam as Imam Ali An-Naqi or Imam Ali Al-Hadi, for example. And then when it comes to the kunya, you find he is given a kunya that other imams of ours were also given, including his grandfather, Imam al-Rida. He was also given the kunya Abul Hasan, which a number of our imams, 5 or 6 of our imams were given. And in order to differentiate between him and the other imams who were given this kunya, he was referred to as Abul Hasan al-Thalith. Abul Hasan, the first being Imam Musa al-Kadhim, the second being Imam al-Rida, and the third being Imam al-Hadi. Of course, we know that imams before these 3 imams were also given the title Abul Hasan as well. And then you find Imam al-Hadi is also given another title, and this is important in this discussion because it will paint a picture of you, for you, of the era and times of Imam al-Hadi. And that title was Ibn al-Rida. He was also known as the son of Rida alayhi salam. This is a title that many historians use to refer to Imam al-Hadi. This is as it relates to Imam al-Hadi himself. His mother, his lineage is also a very holy, religious, pious lineage. You find, of course, his father being Imam al-Jawad and his mother being a lady by the name of Sumana or Samana, who originally was from Morocco. And this marriage between Imam al-Jawad and this lady from Morocco shows us 2 things. First of all, it shows us the diversity that the families of the Ahlul Bayt had, that they were completely okay and fine and preferred to marry outside of their culture at times, if they found the right person, if they found the person with the proper characteristics. You find Imam al-Jawad in this case is marrying an individual who is not from Arabia. She doesn't come from Quraysh, for example. She doesn't come from Bani Hashim. No, she is a lady who doesn't even come from that area. She comes from Africa, number one. And number two, when you read into history, you realize that she was not a free woman. She was a Kaniz originally. And yet, Imam al-Jawad is entering into this marriage, and the result of this marriage ends up to be Imam Al-Hadi as we know him today. So this marriage is not only going beyond ethnicities, it is also going beyond different classes within society. And this is why you find Imam Al-Hadi speaks very highly about his own mother. He says, my mother will be amongst those who will enter into heaven, and she had a deep understanding of the role and the status of Imamah. And in history we read that the mother of Imam Al-Hadi was not simply a mother, she was also a person of knowledge, and she also narrated a hadith of the Ahlul Bayt as well. This gives us a general picture as it relates to the life of Imam Al-Hadi, more so in terms of his lineage. Then when you start to take a look at the life of Imam Al-Hadi, you find that he was born in the year 220 after, or 212 after Hijrah. And this date is very important. The reason why this date is very important is because in history we know Imam al-Jawad, his father, passed away and was martyred in the year 220 after Hijrah. So if we do the math, Imam al-Hadi enters into the role of Imamah at a very young age. This is something that is very widely known for Imam al-Jawad, but not as widely known for Imam al-Hadi, his son. Whereas not only Imam al-Jawad played this role at a very young age, Imam al-Hadi also played this role at a very young age as well. And this is why his role and his presence is so key in history. You find near Prophet salawatullahi wasalamu alayhi foretell, this is mentioned in Al-Kafi and other sources as well, that the Prophet was speaking about the child that is to be born from Imam al-Jawad. He said, this, my grandson al-Jawad will have a son. This son of mine is pious, he is pure, he has virtues, and he is also a place where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has entrusted his knowledge with. He has placed his knowledge in his chest. The answer to all questions, the answer to all mysteries lies in the chest of this son of Al-Jawad, who we know today to be Imam Al-Hadi. And beyond that, you find Imam Al-Jawad also, knowing that Imam Al-Hadi is going to become the next Imam at a very young age, you find Imam Al-Jawad, before he leaves this world, he starts to set the foundation for the companions to know who they are to refer to after him. A companion of Imam al-Jawad asked him, his name was Ismail ibn Mahran. Ismail says, this time when Mu'tasim had summoned Imam al-Jawad to leave from the city of Medina to Baghdad, I turned to Imam al-Jawad and I asked him, I said, Ya ibn Rasulullah, Ya Abu Ja'far, you're leaving us. If you were to not return from this trip, knowing the type of person that Mu'tasim is, who are we supposed to refer to? And in this hadith we read that Imam al-Jawad started to cry. He started to shed tears, and the tears started to roll down his face and onto his beard. And then he turned to his companion Ismail. He said, Ismail, you are right, you are correct. This time when I go on this trip, there is no chance of me returning, but know that the Imam that you are to follow after me is my son Ali, who we know as Imam Al-Hadi today. You find the Prophet, Imam Al-Jawad, they are setting the foundation for Imam Al-Hadi to take on this role. And this is key because according to historians, Imam Al-Hadi at this point, he is around 7 or 8 years of age. This is not a grown man. And this is where the plotting and the planning of Mu'tasim, who was the Khalifa of that time, comes into the picture. He comes up with a concept and a plot and a plan that maybe no other Khalifa has come up with when it comes to the Ahlul Bayt. And his understanding is that I have to take advantage of this opportunity while Ali, the son of Muhammad al-Jawad, is young, while he is still a child from his own perspective. This is where things start to take a turn, because Imam al-Hadi now starts to enter into society not simply as the son of an imam, but also as an imam himself. Recite a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. So the plot in the plan that the Khalifa of the time, Mu'tasim, comes up with is this. And if you were to look at this plot and plan from the outside, it would seem like a very clever and smart plot and plan. His plan is this. He thinks to himself that this family, they have this child. This child right now, he's not a threat. Right now, he's 7 years of age, 8 years of age. If I can take his character somehow and mold his character in the way that I want to, then when he grows into an adult, he will not be a problem for me the way his father was a problem for me. He will not turn into an obstacle for my plans the way Muhammad al-Jawad was an obstacle for my plans. And Mu'tasim comes up with this idea that Al-Hadi, from this young age of 7 or 8, he is going to appoint for him a mentor, a teacher that is supposed to raise him, that is supposed to teach him, show him the ropes of life, but in this process to separate him and distance him from the upbringing of the Ahlul Bayt. And he starts to put this plan into place. Therefore, when Imam al-Jawad is martyred, and we know he was martyred at a very young age, at the age of 25. So you can imagine that his children are also going to be very, very young. In the case of Imam al-Hadi, only 7 or 8 years of age. Now that Imam al-Jawad is out of the picture, Mu'tasim, he sends a note and a message to the governor of Medina, because he himself is in Baghdad. He sends a note to the governor of Medina, and he tells him to appoint a mentor or a teacher for Imam al-Hadi. But there is one condition for this mentor and this teacher. That one condition is that this mentor and teacher cannot be a lover of the Ahlul Bayt. He cannot be a fan of the Ahlul Bayt. He has to be someone who is going to influence Imam al-Hadi as he is growing up to become an individual who distances himself from the stance that his father used to take in different situations. And therefore, the governor of Medina, he appoints an individual who is very knowledgeable in the city of Medina by the name of Al-Junaydi. Junaydi is appointed for this task. And the governor of Medina, in fact, places a specific stipend for him as well. Because Mu'tasim understands that if he can mold Imam al-Hadi to become the type of person that he wants him to be, any money that he invests into this process is worth it. Any money that he can invest into making sure Imam al-Hadi does not turn into an obstacle for him is worth it. So he sets aside, the governor of Medina, a special stipend for Al-Junaydi. And Al-Junaydi, he starts to teach Imam al-Hadi. And then when you read into history, you find that more than Al-Junaydi influencing Imam al-Hadi starts to influence his mentor and his teacher. And this is the beauty of the Ahlul Bayt. Because Al-Junaydi, the first time he sits with Imam al-Hadi, he is immediately struck by the maturity, by the intelligence, by the akhlaq of this supposed child. And then days pass and months pass, and Junaydi is supposedly teaching Imam al-Hadi until a person from Medina, his name was Muhammad ibn Ja'far, he comes to Al-Junaydi. He says, tell me, this child that you are teaching, tell me, how's it going? How are things with him? And Al-Junaydi says, well, I'm surprised you refer to him as a child and not as a great scholar. And this person is surprised. Says, what do you mean? He says, because anytime I teach him about a particular knowledge, I give him everything I know on that topic, but when I share it with him, then he turns around and adds to my knowledge. More than him benefiting from me, I am the one who has been benefiting from him. This is not a child that I'm dealing with. This is not a normal child. He's different. And the historians say that days passed, The same person came back and asked Al-Junaidi again. He said, how is it going with the child? And this time he responded, he said, you shouldn't call him a child anymore. Because there are times where I am teaching him Quran, and he wants to get up like children do, wants to get up and leave the dars. He wants to leave the lesson. And before he wants to move from one class to another class or one room to another room, I ask him to stop. And I say, you cannot leave until you recite Fulan surah, this or that surah. And he says, this child turns around to me and asks me, he says, which surah do you want me to recite for you? And I choose a surah. And he starts to recite with the most beautiful voice, and he recites with the most correct qira'ah as well. And when he recites, I learn from his qira'ah. And he finally ended like this. He said, many people think I am the teacher, whereas in fact this child is my teacher. I learn from him more than he learns from me. And this continued and continued, that this person who is known as Al-Junaidi, over time, when he interacts with Imam Al-Hadi over and over again, he reaches a point where finally he professes his faith and belief in Imam Al-Hadi as his Imam. And this starts to set the tone as a pattern in the life of Imam Al-Hadi. That though there was a lot of censorship, though his character was not able to shine like the characters of some of our previous Imams, because there was so much surveillance on him, those who had an opportunity to interact with him, though initially they were enemies of him and his family, slowly over time they would turn into friends of his. And this is the beauty of the character of Imam Al-Hadi. You also find this as Imam Al-Hadi gets older and older, then the time of Muttawakir comes around. Muttawakir, who is the third Khalifa after Mu'tasim, when he comes into the picture, there is a first step that he takes. One of the first things that he does is that he writes a letter to Imam Al-Hadi, and essentially he forces him out of the city of Medina. Very similar to how Ma'mun forced Imam al-Rida to Khurasan, very similar to how you find Mu'tasim summoned Imam al-Jawad from Medina to Baghdad, where he was martyred. They start to do the same thing. And you see this pattern that the Khulafa of Bani al-Abbas have, that they're not okay with pressuring the Imam only. They need to have him right by themselves so that they can see every step that they are taking. He writes this letter, but very similar to Ma'mun, he writes the letter in a way where the public does not seem to fully understand and grasp that this is a forceful move. They understand it more so that the Khalifa wants to be around Imam Al-Hadi. This was to save face. This was to create an atmosphere so that people would not feel like he is going against Imam Al-Hadi directly. And the letter has been narrated in history. When you look at the letter, it's very beautiful. It says, Amirul Mu'mineen, referring to himself, would love to see you more. He would love to visit you more. And of course, Imam Al-Hadi knows that this is a forceful move. So you find that Mu'tasim or Mutawakkil, he appoints someone to go to Medina and bring Imam Al-Hadi. And this person, his name is called Yahya ibn Harthama. Yahya comes to the city of Medina, and he gets someone else by the name of Burayha to accompany him on this task. Yahya ibn Harthama says, when I entered into the city of Medina to summon Imam Al-Hadi, to take Imam Al-Hadi from Medina to Samirra at this point, he says, the moment I entered, because everybody knew why I was there, everyone in the city was sad. Everyone was taking on the form as if there's a calamity that's going to come to the city. And he says, I had to go around to different people in the city and tell them, listen, I'm not taking Imam Al-Hadi to martyr him. We're not going to hurt him. This is simply him going from one city to another city. And of course, people did not believe him, but they calmed down a little bit. And he enters into the house of Imam Al-Hadi forcefully, and he starts to check the house. And he says, I found nothing except for the place where he used to pray and some books of dua and Quran. That's all I was able to find. Then they start to move along with this individual by the name of Burayha. And this individual plays a key role in this story. Burayha was from Medina. He had created problems for Imam Al-Hadi as well. As they start to leave the city of Medina, you find Burayha approaches Imam Al-Hadi. And he starts to threaten Imam Al-Hadi. He says, if you were to complain to Muttawakir that I gave you a hard time, then I am going to make sure that your relatives pay the price for that. Because at least from a superficial perspective, Muttawakir and Imam Al-Hadi, on the surface level, they have good relationships. Very similar to how Ma'mun and Imam Al-Rida, on the surface level, Ma'mun wanted to show that they have good relationships. And this is why Muttawakir had said it in this way, that if anyone were to come and complain, or if Imam Al-Hadi were to complain about anyone else, that person would have to pay the price. So Burayha, now he's worried. He comes to Imam Al-Hadi, he says, listen, if you complain about me to Muttawakir, then your relatives are going to pay the price. Your tribe is going to pay the price. I will burn the ranches and the trees that they own, and I will make sure that you regret complaining to Muttawakir. Take a moment to understand this position. Imam Al-Hadi right now is not in a position where he has the advantage. In fact, he is in a very disadvantaged position. Yes, he's being summoned, he's being forcefully taken out of his own hometown, the city of Medina. He's going to Samarra where he is gharib, he is lonely. But take a look at how the Imam is poised, how the Imam responds. And with the way the Imam responds, he takes this person from being an enemy and turns him into a friend and an ally of his. Burayha came and said this to the Imam. The Imam said, you know what, don't worry about it. I won't complain about you to Muttawakir. But the reason why I won't complain is because I don't need to complain to Muttawakir. Because last night in my prayer, I complained about you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when I complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about someone, I no longer complain to another human being about that person. And you can imagine that Burayha, he starts to shiver. He's very worried. The hadith and the narration says he started to cry. He fell to the feet of Imam Al-Hadi. And this scared him to his core. He fell to the feet of Imam Al-Hadi. He asked for forgiveness, and Imam Al-Hadi forgave him in that position. This is the akhlaq of our Imams, brothers and sisters, that we have to learn from. That they were so wonderful in their akhlaq, their maturity, their intelligence, their patience, the way they would take time to be posed when they responded to a threat. It was so beautiful that enemies would turn into friends. Foes would turn into allies. A person who was supposed to be an adversary would turn into a person who would show mercy now, but only because of this insight that the Imams had. And this, you will find the roots of it in the verses of the Quran. Surah Fussilat, verses 34 and 35, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us this. He says, when you are dealing with a person who does bad to you, he does wrong to you, idfa' billati hiya ahsan. When you're going to respond, take your time. Respond in the way that's going to have the best outcome. Sometimes this best outcome is that the person I'm responding to, the person you are responding to, that what was going to happen is going to stop them from continuing to do wrong to you. That's one outcome. Sometimes the outcome is that you take this person from an enemy and you turn them into a friend. And this is possible. It can happen. Sometimes you don't make the best impression with someone. They criticize you, they critique you, they say, you're like this, you're like that. But then over time, if you show them the proper akhlaq, then all of a sudden you'll see. Over time, sometimes they will become your best allies because now they realize in reality who you are. This doesn't apply to every situation, but some situations you can even hope for an outcome like this. The Quran says, when someone does wrong to you, idfa' billati hiya ahsan. Respond in the best of manners. And then the Quran says, فَإِذَا الَّذِي بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَهُ عَدَاوَةٌ. Respond in a way that though there might be animosity between the two of you, that maybe your relationship goes from animosity to friendship. كَأَنَّهُ وَلِيٌّ حَمِيمٌ. That maybe he turns out to be a friend of yours. And you can never tell, brothers and sisters, sometimes the person who initially has a number of problems with you, sometimes over time when he gets to know you, then you'll see he becomes a friend. Not always, but it's possible. But the message here is that my akhlaq has to be such that when someone does wrong to me, that I don't burn all the bridges all of a sudden, that I don't even give this person the room to return back to me. No, my akhlaq has to be in a way where if this person were to regret what he was doing, he has the room to return to me. Take a look at this. Burayha, he is forcing the Imam out of Medina. And yet, you find somewhere in the middle of the way, he is forgiven for the sin of his, and he becomes an ally of the Imam. See, things can change sometimes if you have the proper akhlaq. This is why Imam Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, he beautifully says, he says to his Shia, he says, Kunu lana zayna, wa la takunu alayna shayna. Be means of adornment for us. Make us look good. Wa la takunu alayna shayna. Don't make us look bad. Don't give us a bad reputation with your akhlaq. And then in another hadith, the Imam tells a companion of his, he says, you can go, whoever you come across who is a Shia of ours, whoever you come across who obeys us when we command, tell them this. Give them our salam and tell them this, that when they have the proper manners and others see the manners of this person, this Shia, they will say, Hada adabu Ja'far. They say, these are the manners of Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq. These are the followers of Ja'far. He's Ja'fari. And then the Imam continues. He says, but when you don't return an amana when it's given to you, when you don't have the good akhlaq with people, when you don't do the right things, then people look at you, they say, Hada adabu Ja'far. These are the terrible manners that their master and teacher, Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq, has taught them. Look, this is how they are. This is how the Ja'faris are. He says, when you do good and people say, these are the manners of the Shia, he says, this surur, this happiness is brought to me. I become happy when I hear this. But he says, when you have the wrong manners and people sit there and look at you and they distance themselves from you and they say, this is how these Ja'faris are, he says, يَدْخُلُ عَلَيَّ عَارُهُ. The bad reputation of it doesn't just affect you, it affects me as well. Imam Sadiq says, this is a lesson for us, brothers and sisters. The way I walk and talk, is it in a way where the more people interact with me, the more people get to know me, do they feel like coming closer to my faith? Or is it the opposite at times? Where this person feels like he wants to distance himself from me over time. Recite a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajjil farajahum. This is what you find. Imam Al-Hadi is now moving from Medina to the city of Samarra. Now you enter into the era of Muttawakir. And the era of Muttawakil had a number of characteristics, but probably the most defining factor of the era of Muttawakil, the time that he ruled, which is almost 15 years, was the pressure that he placed on the Shia. And this is a separate topic, the pressure and the persecution that the Shia went through, especially during the time of Muttawakil. Yes, during the time of Bani al-Abbas in general, for the most part, they were all dark times for the Shia. But the time of Muttawakil was different. He had more power, his rule was more stable, and he was known as a person who was there to persecute the Shia. And this persecution started and would begin and would continue for even the smallest of things. There was a teacher who used to teach his own children who was a lover of the Ahlul Bayt. His name was Ibn Sakit. He's a famous companion of the Imam. And one day he asked this teacher of his children, he said, are my two children better or Hassan and Hussein, grandchildren of the Prophet? And Ibn Sakit responded, he said, of course they're better. These guys, they don't compare. And we read in history that Muttawakil, he took the life of this teacher of his children. And this is just a small glimpse into the persecution that Muttawakil created for the Shia of that time. This is a talk for another time, and we'll leave it for another time. But there's a lesson to be learned there as well. Because we live our lives as a minority. There are many times where we are under pressure, but we have to learn from the past. The pressure that was there during the time of our Imams, sometimes it doesn't even come close to the pressure we have today, at least referring to those of us who live in this part of the world. Yes, other parts of the world, we hear about the persecution of our brothers and sisters. Yes, but for most of us, there's a lesson to be learned there as well. So Muttawakir, his time and his era was defined by the persecution of the Shia. This started by killing, by torturing, and in a very symbolic move, and in a move that had essentially implications that went beyond the time of Muttawakir himself, he was the first to set this tradition and this sunnah of destroying the grave of Imam Al-Hussein. And according to historians, he did this more than once. And there were times where he would let water over the grave to remove all of the remains of the grave, to make sure that the Shia, they do not congregate, they do not come here, they do not reinforce themselves through the ziyarah. This was something that Muttawakir started, and it has happened a number of times throughout history where the grave of Abu Abdullah has been destroyed. This was the era of Muttawakir. And this pressure was so immense that there were times where Imam Al-Hadi, he prayed against Muttawakir. And one time, he raised his hands, and this dua that he did was more of a curse on Muttawakir this time. And it has been narrated in our books of hadith of the dua of madhloom against the zalim, the dua of the oppressed against the oppressor. And historians mention that 3 days after Imam Al-Hadi made this dua, they say that Muttawakir, he left this world and he was killed by his own son. He left this world. He was not able to live any longer than that. Now that Imam Al-Hadi has entered into Samarra, his chapter of his life in Medina is done. And unlike Imam Al-Jawad, he did not leave Medina without his child. No, he came to Samarra with his child, Imam Hassan al-Askari. This is where they were going to be. And the surveillance was very severe. But as much pressure and surveillance there was, you find the character of Imam Al-Hadi continues to shine no matter where he goes. Though there are those who want to turn off this light, they want to get rid of this nur, you find Imam Al-Hadi anywhere he goes, his character continues to shine. And one of those aspects that shows the character of Imam Al-Hadi is his charitability. How charitable he was. This is not an imam like Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, who had access, for example, to Baytul Mal. No, this is an imam who is very much confined. This is an imam who is very much pressured, and still he is charitable. So when you read in history, you find that Imam Al-Hadi was charitable in 3 different ways. And each of these carries its own lesson for us, brothers and sisters. Historians say that Imam Al-Hadi, while he was in Samarra, before that even, he used to go and visit the poor. He used to go and visit the orphans. He used to sit with them. And just like his grandfathers, he used to carry bags of flour and food and bread at night. And he would bring it to these orphans, and he would bring it to these widows, and he would bring it to the poor. And when he would hand them this flour, this bread, whatever it was, he would say, "La nuridu minkum jaza'an wala shukura." We don't want you to thank us, right? إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. We do it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Very similar to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib and Fatima salawatullahi wa salamu alayha. This was the first step, that the little that Imam Al-Hadi had, he would still give from it. Many of us assume that if we have a little, that we are not to be charitable. Yes, the one who has a lot, he is to be charitable. The one who has a little is not to be charitable. This is not what Imam Al-Hadi taught us. Imam Al-Hadi taught us that you are to be charitable. If you have little, then to a lesser degree. But being charitable, that spirit has to be there at any given moment. The Imam was asked, they said, what is the best sadaqah? What is the best charity that's given? And the Imam responded, he said, the best charity that is given is the charity of the one who doesn't have much. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards him based on his intention, not based on what he had given. Because when he gives, it's even more difficult for him. He has even less to give. It's even more difficult for him to give in this situation. The first step of charitability that we learn from Imam Al-Hadi is to give even when you don't have much. Number one. Then number two comes a second step. And this second step carries a big lesson for us, brothers and sisters. That Imam Al-Hadi, not only he used to give from what he had, but he was also putting himself in a position to create more wealth. He was a resourceful individual. You find that his companions were surprised by how hard he used to work. Ali ibn Abi Hamza comes to him, companion of his comes to him. He says, I came to Imam Al-Hadi and I saw he's working in the middle of the land. And he's working with his shovel, he's digging up the dirt and he's doing this hard work. I came to him. I said, Ya ibn Rasulullah, Ya Abul Hasan, where are all the men? Where are all your companions, your servants? That's what Ali ibn Abi Hamza was referring to. So where are all the people who work for you? And Imam Al-Hadi understood what he was saying. He was saying, you're not supposed to be working. I see you are, Ali ibn Abi Hamza says, I saw Imam Al-Hadi, he was working so hard, he was sweating profusely from head to toe. His clothing was wet. That's how much he was sweating in the weather of that area of the world, in that region of Iraq. He says, I said, you are not to be working. And then take a look at what Imam Al-Hadi said. He said, Ya Ali, there are those who have picked up the shovel and dug up the earth who are much better than me. He says, I asked him, said, who are these people who have worked on the earth who are better than you? He said, the Prophet and Ali ibn Abi Talib and all of the great prophets of Allah, they also worked as hard as I am working right now. What does this mean? This means Imam Al-Hadi, he didn't just used to give, he also placed himself in a situation to be resourceful. He also placed himself in a situation to create more wealth for those who are in need. Do we do this, brothers and sisters? Do I live a life where I can be resourceful to those who will be in need in the future? Or do I live a life where I'm just trying to get by? Will I live in a society where so many opportunities are presented to me to make a living and not only pay my own bills, but to then take the hands of others and raise them up as well? This is what Imam Al-Hadi used to do, and yet you will find the prevalent culture amongst us is, as long as I get by, as long as I can just pay the bills. No, that's for a person who's not growing up in a society that is full of opportunities, the way the society that we live in today is. Not to say there aren't obstacles. Of course there are obstacles. But there are many opportunities around us. Why live a life where I can only take care of myself in the future? No. Your community is going to be in need of you. Many of your folks are going to be in need of you. Your parents, your relatives, many people around the world are going to be in need of those who are resourceful. This is what Imam Al-Hadi used to do. Imam Al-Hadi, if he was working hard on the land, was he working for himself? Or was he working to produce this wealth, to make it available to those who are in need? And this is a big lesson for us to learn as well, brothers and sisters. How resourceful are you? How resourceful am I? This is the second step in the charitability of Imam Al-Hadi. Then you move to the third step, where you give in from your wealth already, and you have tried to produce more wealth as well. But then still there will be times where Imam Al-Hadi, he has given from his wealth, and he has given from the wealth that he has produced for that purpose as well. And he has no wealth, and still he is charitable. And we might look at this and say, this is impossible. How is this possible? How can Imam be charitable when he has given his own wealth already? He doesn't have any more wealth. But when you look into the life of the Imam, you find that he would find his ways to be charitable even when he had nothing to give. Is this impossible? This is how the Imam used to live his life. A companion of the Imam comes to him. He was, of course, not a close companion of the Imam. He was from a Bedouin. And Bedouins were those who did not live in the cities. They lived in the outskirts or in the deserts. They were not very familiar with the culture of the city. The Bedouin comes to Imam Al-Hadi. And initially he goes to the house of Imam Al-Hadi. The family tells him that he is not here. He is working on a land in the outskirts of Samarra. The man goes to this land. He finds the land. He finds Imam Al-Hadi is there. He approaches Imam Al-Hadi. Says, Ya ibn Rasulullah, I'm in a position where I've taken on this loan and I'm not able to pay it back. No matter how much I try, I don't have the capabilities to pay it back. And it's a very big loan. But I am amongst those who loves you and loves your family if you can help me. And Imam Al-Hadi says, yes, this is a very urgent need that you have. But I don't have anything to give you right now. The wealth, it's all given, it's already taken. But Imam Al-Hadi says, what I can tell you to do is this. He says, I will write down on a piece of paper that this many dirhams, 10,000 dirhams, I owe to you. And you will take this piece of paper, and I will sign it. You will take this piece of paper. Tomorrow you will return back to the city of Samarra. And when I am in the city of Samarra and people have gathered around me, you will approach me when people have gathered around me. And when you approach me, you will show everyone this piece of paper. And you will say, Yabna Rasulullah, you owe me this money. And no matter how much I tell you that I don't have this money, don't hold back. Keep pushing. Keep pressuring me. And this Bedouin, he hears what the Imam says, and he says, okay, if this is what you want me to do, I'll do it. The next day comes around, Imam Al-Hadi is in Samarra. People have gathered around him. They know who he is. They know he's come from Medina. People have gathered around him. And amongst those who have gathered around him are some of the spies of Muttawakir as well. And this man enters. He enters. People have gathered around Imam Al-Hadi. He enters. He says, move away. I have something that I need from this man. Say, what do you need? He says, this man, this grandson of the Prophet, he owes me 10,000 dirhams. And many people sitting there, they say, no, that's not possible. How is that possible? How is it that he owes you so much money? He says, no, he owes me. Here, take a look at this piece of paper. It's signed by him. He owes me this money. He is to give me this money. And he continues to pressure. And Imam Al-Hadi truthfully responds. He says, I don't have this money to give it to you. But because he was told to continue to pressure, he continues to ask for this money until the spies of Muttawakir take word to Muttawakir. And Muttawakir, because he wants to keep this relationship with Imam Al-Hadi alive, he gives 30,000 dirhams to Imam Al-Hadi. And then take a look at the generosity of our Imam. He took this 30,000 dirhams and he gave it to this man. And this man turned around, he said, my loan was only 10,000. And Imam Al-Hadi said, you take the rest for your family. When we give, we don't take back. He gives him all of the 30,000. And the narration beautifully says that when he was walking away, when this man was walking away from the scene, he was reciting to himself this verse that we recited at the beginning of the lecture. He said, Allahu a'lamu haythu yaj'alu risalatah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows who to make a wasi, who to make an imam, and who to make a messenger, and who to not make and give these roles to. He knows where to put imama. He knows where to place prophethood, where to choose or who to choose as a prophet or as an imam as he was walking away. Even when Imam Al-Hadi did not have his own wealth, he puts his reputation, he puts his credit, he puts anything that he can use to be charitable. Sometimes you and I will find ourselves in this position as well. You may not be able to give from your wealth. Maybe you can give from your time. Maybe you can give from your expertise. Maybe you can give from your energy. How charitable are we? That is a question that we are to answer through the lessons that we learn from the life of Imam Al-Hadi. Let us take our hearts, brothers and sisters, to the city of Samarra. Let us briefly remember these days and nights, the final days and nights of the life of our beloved 10th Imam. You find as the Imams continue, their lineage continues. When it comes to Imam Al-Jawad and Imam Al-Hadi and Imam Hassan Al-Askari, the Shahada and the martyrdom becomes even more lonely than it is with the other Imams. With the other Imams, at least people know that the Imam is masmoom. At least they know that he has been poisoned. But when it comes to the life of Imam Al-Hadi, the Shahada of Imam Al-Hadi, you find that even him being poisoned is hidden because there's so much pressure, there's so much censorship, there's so much surveillance that he is poisoned in the loneliness of his house. The companions of Imam Al-Hadi, they say, we one day received a message from Imam Al-Hadi. And we opened this letter and we saw that he had written with his own handwriting that tonight, إِنِّي رَاحِلٌ إِلَى اللَّهِ فِي هَذِهِ اللَّيْلَةِ, I'm going to leave this world on this night. And he said, you all don't come even to visit me. This is the ghurba, this is the loneliness of Imam Al-Hadi. He said, you all don't come to visit me. Stay where you are and wait for the imamah of my son, Al-Hasan, Abu Muhammad Al-Hasan, to start. You stay where you are. And they say, we woke up the next morning and automatically in the city everyone knew that Imam Al-Hadi has left this world. This is the ghurba and the loneliness of Imam Al-Hadi. Imagine the pain that Imam Al-Hadi is going through. Imagine the pain that Imam Hassan al-Askari is going through as he watches his father go through these final moments. The poison is doing its work on the body and there is no one to come to the aid of Imam Al-Hadi. And this reminds you of the ghurba of the plains of Karbala, brothers and sisters, because in the plains of Karbala, if you find with Imam Al-Hadi, at least the body was buried, at least the salat was performed. You find in the plains of Karbala, the bodies were lying on the ground for days. In the plains of Karbala, you find the bodies are massacred. In the plains of Karbala, the ghurba and the loneliness is even more than what you find with Imam Al-Hadi. Sukaina, the daughter of Imam Husayn, narrates for us. She says the day after Ashura, when we were leaving the plains of Karbala, they were forcing us to leave. She says, I saw the body of my father. I threw myself on the body of my father. And she says, as I started to embrace the body of my father, I started to cry and cry so much that I fainted. And I had a dream, and in this dream, I found my father reciting this poem, reminding me of the most difficult moments in the plains of Karbala. And these are those lines that we are familiar with. She says, I saw my father recite to me, لَيْتَكُمْ جَمِيعًا يَوْمَ عَاشُورَا تَنْظُرُونِي. I wish you were all there on the day of Ashura to witness this moment. كَيْفَ أَسْتَسْقِي لِطَفْلِي. The way I was begging for water, the way I was asking for water, لِطِفْلِي, for my son, for my child. فَأَبَوْا أَنْ يَرْحَمُونِي. But they didn't give me any of this water. And then he continues, he says, instead of giving my Ali al-Asghar any water, فَسَقَوْهُ سَهْمَ بَغْيٍ عِوَضَ الْمَاءِ الْمَعِينِ. Instead of giving my 6-month-old any water, they shot a 3-headed arrow into the throat of my child. This is the ghurba of Karbala. La yawm كَيَوْمِكَ يَا أَبَا عَبْدِ اللَّهِ. Imagine the loneliness of Sukaina in those moments as she is forcefully moved from the plains of Karbala. أَلَا لَعْنَةُ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us the tawfiq and the opportunity to be amongst the true followers of the Ahlul Bayt, inshaAllah. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that what we do in this world, the way we live our life, makes our beloved 10th Imam proud of us in this world and in the next, inshaAllah. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are able to learn from the charitability of Imam Al-Hadi, that he gives us the tawfiq to give even when we don't have much, to produce for those who are going to be in need, to give not only from our time, but from anything else that we have available to us as well, inshallah. And last but not least, we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He hastens the return of our beloved 12th Imam bin Nabi wa alih, rahimallahu man qara'a al-Fatihata ma'a as-salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.